Hey class, we're going to start a new unit on quadratic functions. So the first thing we're going to learn is how to write a quadratic equation given certain information. So you're going to learn about three forms for the quadratic function. So let's say that you are given this information. So let's say you're given the vertex of our quadratic function, and you're given 1 point. Now remember, this is function notation, and what's inside the parentheses is x, and what f of x is equal is always y. So first thing I did was I labeled the h and the k, which would represent our vertex that we learned about from the absolute value function. And then I labeled the x and the y. So yes, the vertex for a quadratic function is always going to be h and k. So here's the form that we're going to use for the vertex. It's called the vertex form. And we use the vertex form when we know what the vertex is and we have a point given to us. So here we have our vertex form. So the first thing we're going to do now is we're going to substitute the vertex and point into this form, and we're going to calculate a. So we're going to plug -1 in for h, -2 in for k, 1 in for x, and 2 goes in for y. And then that will leave us an equation where we're going to solve for a to find out if there's a vertical stretch, vertical compression, and if there's any reflections going on. So at any moment, if you fall behind, please pause the video so that way you can stay caught up and have this all written in your notes. So here we have it. Everything's plugged in, h and k, and y and x. So all we have left to do now is to solve this equation for a. So when you solve an equation, before you start undoing operations to isolate a, you should always try to simplify each side. So we're going to start by simplifying using GEMDOS, doing the grouping symbols, then the exponents here. And so we end up with this. Okay, and then we're going to continue. We're going to do the exponents here. 2 squared is 4. And now at this point, we can now begin solving. So when you solve, remember you're going to do GEMDOS backwards. You're going to undo adding and subtracting first. And then you undo multiplying and dividing. And we have our a value. So since our a value is 1, there is no stretch or compression. And there is no reflection, since it's positive. All right, step 2. Once we have found the a value, we can write the quadratic equation using only a, h, and k. So we're going to plug in those values into our equation. And now we have the equation for a quadratic function that has a vertex of -1, -2. And it goes through the point 1, 2. Okay, good. Now there's 2 more forms for the quadratic formula, quadratic equation that we're going to be using. So let's look at the next form. So first, let's start with the given information. So notice, in this instance, I'm giving you the x-intercepts. The x-intercepts are also known in math circles as the roots. Hence, I labeled them R1 and R2 because in this case there are 2 roots. So again, we're given a point, and we're given the two roots. So now, what form would we use? Well, not the vertex form, because we have not been given the vertex. We would use what's called factored form, and here is factored form. So factored form has factors, and these three factors are called factors because they're being multiplied together. Remember a factor? So for example, factor of 10, or an example of factors of 10 are 2 and 5. Why? Because they multiply together to give us 10. So when you have something being multiplied by something else, being multiplied by something else, these three things are factors. Okay, so step 1, we're going to substitute the roots and the point. In this case, the point is -2, -2. We're going to substitute those into the equation and calculate a, similar to what we did on the last problem. So notice I plugged in for y, that's this variable right here, I plugged in -2, which I labeled right here. We're going to find a. So the two x's are going to be the same because we have x is -2, so -2 goes in for both x's in the format. Okay, and then it's minus the root. So root 1 I labeled -1, so it's going to be minus, because that's part of the formatting here, and then root 1, which is -1. And then on this side, x, which is -2, minus, and then we plug in root 2, which is 2. So again, we're going to simplify as far as we can before we start solving. So we're going to do what's inside the grouping symbols first. And then we can multiply these together. And then we can start solving by undoing multiplication with division. And we get our a value. Okay, so now that we have our a value and we know what our two roots are, we can go ahead and write the quadratic equation using the a value and the two roots. Now we're going to use the form that we used up here, factored form. We're going to use this form to write the equation. So the a value, which is -1/2, goes in for a. And the two roots, the roots were -1 and 2. So x minus -1, when you plug it in, okay, becomes +1. And then plugging in the other root, which is 2, x minus 2. So if you remember from the absolute value, anytime you're affecting x and you're inside that grouping symbol, it's going to be the opposite. Same is true here. So this is -1, 0 for the root. This is +2, 0 for the root. Okay, now for the fun one. So the third form for quadratic formula, we're going to look at that next. So in this circumstance, we're given 3 points. And I'm telling you that these 3 points are on a parabola, which means we can write a quadratic equation from these 3 points. Now, we're not using calculators, okay? We're not going to do a quadratic regression right now. Right now, we're going to do this by hand. So what you want to do, first of all, is label each point, x, y. Make sure you know that. Hopefully you all do. And we're going to write 3 equations using this form, standard form. So when we're given 3 points, notice we're not specifying a vertex. We're not specifying any roots here. We just know that we have 3 points that are on a parabola, and we want to write the equation. So we're going to use the standard form right here. And so we're going to write 3 equations. So we're going to take one point here. Let's use the point -1, 1 to write this equation. So 1 is y. So that's going to go into the y spot. It's going to substitute in for y. -1 is our x. That's a y, by the way. So that's going to go in everywhere I see an x. So it's going to go in here for x. So we have -1 squared. And it's going to go in here for x. So we have -1. Okay? The a, the b, and the c, we need to calculate. We do not know. All we know is x and y. So we plug those in. So doing the same with the next point. Plugging -3 in for y, 1 in for x, and doing the same thing for the third point. Plugging 4 in for y and 2 in for x. And just like before, we're going to simplify these. So I simplified all 3 of these. So we have these, our solutions over here. And then -1 squared is 1. And 1 times a is a. -1 times b is -b. And then we have our c. And then I did the same thing with the next 2 equations. Okay, now, how do we solve this? Drum roll, please. Ready for it? Anybody can say it before I write it? I know you guys are on the edge of your seats right now. Do you know? That's right. Gaussian elimination method. Hopefully you learned it, because we're going to use it to solve a system, because there's 3 equations, a system of equations. So let's go ahead and start by setting up our matrix. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you what I got here. So we got, now I'm going to move my answers over here to the right hand side, okay? So we have 1, -1, 1, 1. 1, 1, 1, -3. 4, 2, 1, and like I said, I moved the 4 over to the other side, put my equal signs over here. Then the row operations I decided to use, since I had a 1 up here, I went ahead and subtracted row 1 and row 2 to get my 0 here. That's what I have here. And then I multiplied row 1 by 4 and subtracted row 3 to get my 0 here. Now I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because that's a previous video that you already learned. I got my 1 here by dividing this row by -2. Then I multiplied row 2 by -6, so I could subtract row 3 and get my 0 here. And then I divided row 3 by -3 to get my 1 here. And now I'm ready to write my solutions. So C, remember this is my A column, B column, C column. So C equals -4. So there's one of my variables. Hey, look at here. 1b equals -2. No work to do there. So there is my b value. And now calculating C, I have 1a minus 1, and then we're multiplying that times my b value, plus 1 times my c value equals 1. So I wrote the equation and I plugged in b and c. So then I solve this for a, and that's going to give me a equals 3. At this point, guys, we're going to plug these in. A, B, and C is going to go back into our standard form. Right here, A, B, and C. And so here is our A, here's our B, and here's our C, and here's our equation.